Welcome, everybody, to the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. I'm your host, Redbeard, and I greatly appreciate everybody taking the time out of their day to come by, hear what we have to talk about today. And, I hate to say it, but I kind of have to do the obligatory thing. Otherwise, the algorithm kind of hates, they probably hate what I do anyways. But if you guys and gals would be so kind to subscribe if this is your first time here, maybe share to those of whom that might be interested into some of this stuff. They would be greatly appreciated. I swear it is like a constant battle. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know that I really trust the metrics too much. So I'm just trying to figure all this stuff out and do the very best that I can. But without further ado, you know how it goes here. We always put liberty first, and we do not compromise on our principles. So tonight's show is, man, I really had to think about how I wanted to go about this show. There's so much happening, in the media and in the news, but at the same time, I like to try and every so often tie in some historical stuff and seeing what people who came before us kind of had to say, as it kind of reflects on a lot of the things that are going on today. But before, I made that determination, I really had to kind of sit back and be like, by the time I get around to some of this stuff, I feel like some of this stuff is going to be beaten to death. So, I was like, how about I try to do some form of an integration? How about I try to bring some of these things together? So hopefully I'm able to do that effectively for you guys and gals tonight. And just a little bit of housekeeping. So I am back. My work schedule has ramped up significantly. I'm a working guy, I'm blue collar. I go out, I earn a paycheck. I do things other than perpetually sit online and just make content. I'm not that good. So I always joke about the fact that if I wanted to try and make money at something, I would probably have gotten into gaming on YouTube versus doing this. I also do this just solely out of principle. So all of your guys and gals support and your likes, your shares, you're just coming on here to content or to comment and just be a part of this. I really appreciate it. And I hope that you know that. So the nitty gritty of that is I'm going to just be going strictly to Saturdays, probably for the next several months, just as it's going to work a little bit better with my work schedule and trying to make this all work, for the exception of a handful of occasions to where maybe I have a guest on who needs to work something out for the whole week. So that's kind of the nitty gritty of that. That's a little bit of the housekeeping. So let's kind of jump into things. It's been pretty crazy. And as you can kind of tell from the title, we're a nation in distress. The writing essentially is on the wall. And I would make the argument that the writing has been on the wall probably since our founding. And the reason I say that is when our founders had, they fought this long, bloody war, the revolution, to separate from king and country, so to speak. And they wanted to do something different. They wanted to have something better and a real legacy in a country of which their future posterity would be born forth into something that was more agreeable to liberty, to rights, something that took these things seriously, and something to where they figured that the future could have a fighting chance, right? I think a lot of that still rings true today. They didn't create a country where you have a situation of, oh yeah, well, maybe we can just let this go by. No, like they saw and understood the abuses that came before the revolution, and they fought essentially to go the opposite way of that. A constitutional republic was kind of the idea. Well, part of the idea. Before that, before we even had the Constitution, we had the Articles of Confederation, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today, but we're also going to go through a number of different things that I feel are fairly relevant to not only the title, but you'll also see some of the tie-ins. I do want to start, and I know I've probably beat this horse to death, but I do want to start with Cato, because uh, Cato really, he said a lot of the things that the anti-federalists really felt. He had a way of kind of really bringing a uniting tone to the general sentiments of the anti-federalists, and the basic idea that a consolidated government was no good. And so when we look at that, he along with the anti-federalists, they feared extreme centralization. And moving forward with that idea in mind, let's see what he has to say about the issue. The recital or the premises on which the new form of government is erected declares a consolidation or union of all 13 parts or states into one great whole, under the firm of the United States for all various and important purposes therein set forth. So essentially what he's saying is the Constitution, as opposed to the Articles of Confederation, essentially it really creates the framework for a national government. And the Articles of Confederation, essentially, when those were brought together and they were agreed upon, the whole point of the conventions was to amend the Articles of Confederation, to basically supplement it and make it stronger. But when you had the conventions and you had all these people come together, they came forth with the Constitution, and he feared that the Constitution would create a national government in place of, and I quote, a federal union or a federated union, right? And the difference between a national government and a federal union is, in a federal union, at least as it were to the Articles of Confederation, was the states held a majority, much, much more power than they even do under the Constitution. He felt that there was a great threat under the Constitution for the consolidation of power. Now, that's pretty strong coming from a guy who had time to actually evaluate the things that were in the Constitution. And it's not so much the fact that the Constitution would end up terrible, but he saw these things as really mechanisms that would take away the power from both the people and the states, which is why you ended up getting the Bill of Rights. It was something, the Bill of Rights, as I've said before, was looked at by the anti-federalists as being a core component. They absolutely demanded a Bill of Rights was there, including the 10th Amendment, which helped guarantee and codify the rights of the states, along with the 9th Amendment, which covered even the rights not covered within the Bill of Rights outside of the enumerated rights. So all of the rights, even not expressly written or put in there, it covered all of those too. They were very, very careful about these things, and they were very, very worried about abuses that may occur. Now, moving forward, essentially, this precipitated a rallying cry for the other anti-federalists. And he goes on to say, and I wanted to point this out in particular because I think it's very important moving forward here. Whoever seriously considers the immense extent of territory comprehended within the limits of the United States, together with the variety of its climates, productions, and commerce, the difference of the extent and number of inhabitants in all this, the dissimilitude of interest, morals, politics in almost everyone, will receive it as an intuitive truth that a consolidated republican form of government therein can never, and this is where it's really emphasized, form a perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to you and your posterity. And there's great emphasis on this. Essentially, he was saying that with the way that things were being set up, you're never going to be able to guarantee these things because you're biting off way too much. By trying to have a government, a far more general government, a more national government, it would not only be spread too thin, but the potential for things to essentially go awry and deprive some of these things from the states, in which he was essentially arguing the states would be able to greater perform these duties than a broader general government. was just too high. There was too much of a risk, right? And Montesquieu goes on to say a republic to have only a small territory, otherwise, uh, a republic to have only a small territory. Otherwise, it cannot long subsist. So, with that in mind, the general consensus with the anti-federalists was the idea that you don't want to have a huge government with a huge territory because it just creates a blanket of problems. They saw this with Britain. They saw this with the empire mentality. They saw this as the eventual road to ruin, right? You can't ensure tranquility. You can't ensure the liberty and the rights of the people. It just goes all downhill from there. Eventually, it may not happen right away, but eventually. And you will see this egregious consolidation of power. And this was something they very, very much worried about as it pertained to the Constitution. Now, where is this all going? Well, the idea was that we were never supposed to be a national form of government. There was never supposed to be a national form of government as per the Articles of Confederation. It was supposed to have a much greater level of autonomy per the Articles of Confederation. And on top of that, it was supposed to be a federal union, okay? A federal union, which is far vastly different than what we have today. Now, we got the Constitution, we got many of the things, and there were some safeguards that were implemented at the behest, at the demands of the anti-federalists. And you're not going to see me sit here and say that it's the worst thing that could have happened. Quite frankly, given the situation at the time, I would argue it was still a fairly decent document, albeit there's some things that they argued should be amended moving forward that ultimately were non-negotiable. Otherwise, it would lead a road to ruin. Now we look at the government today, they don't even care about the Constitution. You have a government that is completely off the rails. And keeping all of this in mind, one of the things that I think a lot of the founders, anti-federalists or federalists regardless, that they understood is there are expectations for the general populace, right? Which is accountability, eternal vigilance, and knowing when not to comply, as is our right. We do not have to comply to things that are unconstitutional, to things that violate our rights and liberties. We do not have to just go with the system. They understood what happens when you kick the can down the road, you go with the system, and ultimately it leads to a road to ruin. In the Declaration of Independence, we see something also that they explicitly had mentioned, which was when the government becomes destructive of its means, the people have the right to alter or abolish it. Now, in the Declaration of Independence, just a little further down, they do also say not for light and transient causes or whimsical reasons. They have to be very strong reasons as to why you would alter or abolish it. But nevertheless, it was the right of the people to alter or abolish a government that becomes destructive of its means. Again, you're going to see where this is building up to. I do want to also amplify the part within the Declaration of Independence, which is the 27 separate grievances that were made to the king. All of the things that had gone wrong. And if you haven't looked at those, I would highly recommend it. Taxation was not the only reason. It was hardly far from the other reason. I would say that one of the biggest reasons was the disarmament of the colonists at the time and the grand push of being able to overtake more and more of their individual lives as time went on. This ultimately led to many, many other abuses that had not already occurred. And therefore, you got the situation that we did, which was the revolution eventually. Now, given the accountability, given the eternal vigilance, given the idea that we don't have to comply with unconstitutional or destructive tyrannical orders or dictates, right? And the fact that we reserve the right to alter and abolish our government, we also now have to take the lessons from the past and examine what we have contemporarily and see what the heck is going on, what is actually taking place. Now, I was writing down a bunch of stuff as to what to talk about. You know, what are some of the issues I could bring up as different examples, very, very broad examples, but because there's way too much specificity to so many of these, many of which others have talked about in depth. I've certainly talked about a number of these issues to some degree in depth, but I do want to provide a list of things that I think are unavoidable. So to start with, foreign entanglements, gun control, expansive government, the blurring and blending of the executive, judicial, and legislative branches. You have censorship, perpetual warfare, no transparency, spying, warrantless surveillance, i.e. things like FISA 702. You have an insulated political elite, which is something that we also talked about as it pertained to the Senate and the relationship with the executive, and the fact that they would have this cronyism that would occur, this aristocracy, if you will, and this insulating factor that would occur from that dangerous relationship and the blending of these different branches. In addition, you also have things like infrastructure issues. You look at just the travesty of the infrastructure issues and the sheer neglect. You have CBDC, which is something that has been talked about ad nauseum, which the dangers with something like that is if you're not, say, for instance, you're going down the line, you're living your life and you happen to have an opinion, and we're on the CBDC situation. I think about this for one moment. We already have people screaming for censorship. And not just Mark Levin or Ben Shapiro, but we have many, many other people that are just like, oh, we got to censor this stuff. We have to put a cap on this. We can't just allow people to go and spout. You take that and you put something like that with a CBDC, they essentially would be able to turn that spigot off if they even remotely thought that you were going to dissent. And if you don't think that's the case, I've got a $300 million mansion and a unicorn to sell you, and I'm here to tell you I don't have any of these things, and I probably never will. But in the end of the day, it's a very, very dangerous cocktail of things, and that's not the only things that we have here. We have things like out of control spending. We see a budget that continues to grow and grow and grow and simply enrich those of whom are in power, because you know that there's going to be some form of fraud. You already have people getting rich off of the war in Iran by having insider information and being able to make all of these different right moves at the right time. You also have harmful chemicals that they want to basically shield companies from and just allow to go forth and poison all of the individuals who consume these different products, including horrible water systems, which is also part of the infrastructure. You have, in addition to the warfare situation, the perpetual warfare situation, you have the funding, and you get this with the foreign entanglements. You have the funding and supporting of factions. And yes, I will say it, I'm not the only person that says it, but terrorist groups as well, that we train and we fund. This government trains and funds a bunch of these different groups. And I'm sorry if that hurts your feelings, but you kind of have to be an ostrich with your head in the sand to not even see this at this point. It's to a point to where they don't even hide it anymore. Okay, they're not even hiding it. They're not even trying to hide it. There's a paper trail miles long of all of these different groups that we have supported and funded over the many, many years. This government has a habit of pointing the finger at somebody else saying, oh, you're a state sponsor of terrorism. You're funding this faction. We don't like you doing this. We don't like you doing that. Meanwhile, we have done almost more of it, including regime change, toppling of governments, the starting of coups. You know, for instance, the many different coups that happened within the Middle East, in South and Central America. We saw it with the Maidan in Ukraine. The list goes on and on and on. The point being is this is something that the founders, along with everything so far that I've stated, but not the least, were absolutely opposed to. This was something that they only knew an empire to do, a complete despotism to do, forsaking the very, forsaking the very people that have elected them to positions to go forth to represent them, to help ensure tranquility, to help ensure the security of their liberty and their rights, the ability to go forth and to live their lives in the best manner that they possibly can. And instead, we're pursuing all of these hyper destructive policies. But it doesn't stop there. I have much, much more. You have a police state that's been growing for a very, very long time that couples with that surveillance state, the spying, the warrantless searches and seizures. You also have the guarding of these people by qualified immunity. And this isn't just simply at the federal level. You see this type of horrible, horrible action at the state and local levels as well. On top of that, you have people that would like to see whistleblowers and people that come forward imprisoned for the rest of their life. And yes, there are a number of videos on both the left and the right in which both of them had said, well, you know, these people kind of deserve the death penalty or should be put into some type of a black site prison, never to be heard from ever again. I mean, the list of those people go on that have come forward, that have tried to bring the truth. And you have people that want to silence them indefinitely, either for the rest of their lives or permanently 6 feet under into the ground. So this government also doesn't like the truth, which is very ironic because when we look at something like transparency, we also had this administration, and it's not, again, this is not exclusive to this administration, but it is one of the many, many things that we're seeing. How can you say that you're for transparency if you don't even want the truth, if you're willing to bury the truth, if you're not willing to even investigate things like Russiagate, like Epstein, like the pipe bomber, on January 6th, like so many, and that's a very short list, but so many things time and time and time and again. And on top of that, you have a two-tiered justice system. It gets worse. You have growing and abusive taxation that knows no bounds. Taxation was also something the anti-federalists had many, many quarrels about because they saw it not only as a mechanism to overwhelmingly usurp both the property and the earnings of the people, but they also, you have the next one, a standing army, which would supplant or completely get rid of the whole point of a militia or even usurp the militia, depending on the situation, to enforce that form of taxation, to hold true to the bonds of the federal government, the people, by threat of violence, right? So you have this whole list that's coming down, and you're seeing all of these things get folded into one. And on top of that, you also, as I mentioned before, have the destruction of state independence. There's a reason that so many people in this government absolutely screech anytime that you bring up something pertaining to or regarding the 10th Amendment. The idea that the states would even be able to fundamentally have a real form of sovereignty is absolutely egregious. These were all things that the anti-federalists and the founders, more specifically, had seen. They had been through these things. They had seen these types of things before, albeit maybe not with the technological situation that we have today, but some form of it. They had all come from these binds and these chains and these usurpations and these abuses all before. And so when you have the anti-federalists that came forward and they said, whoa, first off, you told us that we're having a convention to amend the Articles of Confederation to make it better, to make it stronger. Now you're trying to create a new form via the Constitution. And the Constitution you're proposing just leaves way too much. And on top of that, they said, look, even if we strengthen the Constitution, we have to be even more specific in our wording. We have to make sure that the government is bound down and fundamentally given as little power as possible. So that way it does not overcome the states. It does not infringe on the rights and liberties of the people, because they saw all of these different things, from taxation to standing armies to foreign entanglements to a security state to firearm confiscation. I mean, all of the things that I have just laid out before you, we had people almost 250 years ago that fundamentally saw the dangers, the anti-federalists who raised concerns before the Constitution was ratified, and I would argue they very much so even likely afterwards, that they understood what this creates. And now we are left, in quoting Michael Bolden from the 10th Amendment Center, the largest government ever seen in human history. And there is a section, a demographic of individuals that are okay with that. And I would argue that a majority of those people are the ones, the very powerful elite, that are in the positions over the average person. They can ingratiate themselves with as much money and as much power as they would like. But the whole point that I'm trying to make here is one that the anti-federalists and the founding fathers had made a long time ago, which is a government will never relinquish consolidated power. It will never give up the power that it has once assumed. And on top of all of these things, they never let a good crisis go to waste. They will exploit any form of crisis. They will exploit any form of turmoil, any type of situation whatsoever to both usurp the liberties and rights of the people, but also implicate people that they don't like. And I think that's a very, very dangerous thing. It's a very dangerous thing. It's why when you saw something like the Patriot Act that came to fruition, you had extreme concerns as to what it would open the doorway to. And now we see exactly what it's opened the doorway to. We have a government at current that has not only very much become extremely destructive of its means, but one that has no problem killing its own people. And if you don't think I'm right about that, I would highly suggest that you would go back and open a textbook. It's murdered its own people, both domestically and abroad. Then we've even used drones to kill American citizens without due process or a trial. They have the ability, with all of this consolidated power, to be able to look at the average human being who has some form of dissent and say, oh, we need to absolutely make sure that this person can never say these things again, which means that we can lock up their bank account. We can deny them access to other functions within the public and private sphere. And on top of that, we can add their name to a list, a quote unquote terrorist list, for simply having a espoused, an espoused position as it pertains to patriotism, the founding principles, liberty, rights. When you look at just individuals that were added to lists years ago for simply saying the states have the right to their sovereignty. We have the right to gather and form militias. We have the right to defend ourselves from the government, and even in so much as a variety of other things. But it's not that far beyond reason that they would add you to a list, basically label you a terrorist or a dissenter or somebody that is problematic in this country. Again, all things that people 250 years before us had predicted were going to happen. And it's all come to fruition. All of these things. And I think that, well, we can't rewind time. We can't go back in the past. And I don't think that we should go back necessarily in the past, right? Like it's not something attainable. But what we can do is we can look at the lessons and the warnings and the blueprint that we're given and educate ourselves and be able to do this. And we have to find a way forward. We can learn from these people. We can understand where they are coming from. We can further examine their arguments and then be able to take those things and figure out what the heck is going on here. And I know a lot of people don't necessarily like opening a book anymore. There's tons of audiobooks, both for arguments of the anti-federalists, the federalists, even the Constitution. I'm sure there's an audiobook for that. There's so many other things. But then being able to go through and disseminate different patterns and different things that tell us what we need to see. But yet you still have a large, I would say, a large enough demographic of where people don't even believe their own eyes anymore. It can't be true. We just have to trust the plan. It's not going to be an empire. It's not going to be all these things. It's going to help us. It's going to keep us safe. They welcome these shackles of tyranny every single day. And I understand that you're not always going to be able to reach every single person, but we have to realize the situation that we're in here. We can't ignore the situation anymore. And, you know, I hope it's not the case, because we just came from the Rona, right? But now we have another situation to where there's, you know, I don't want to box myself into a corner here, but now you're having a situation where you've seen a lot of traffic on the media lately where they've talked about a particular virus. So what is that going to look like? They say, supposedly, WHO says it's not a situation. It's not going to be like the Rona. But they have no credibility anymore. And even though that we're not part of that gaggle, I find it very hard to believe that our politicians would not go forth and do things like lockdowns and usurp rights and liberties again. And I think that I think you would see potentially a more tight-fisted approach on that. And I want to point out something. I think it's fantastic. But Mayor made a comment here. This government is anti-human. We have to understand that these are people that don't care about you or your loved ones. They will send your children to war. They will use them as tax cattle. They will tax you even when you're dead. They will make up whatever excuse to make you a criminal, make up a law that doesn't exist. We've seen this all before. They will stop at nothing to gain more power over you and your daily life. And I have to wonder, how much more does it take? Now, moving on, I have almost 2 full pages of notes here. The list of all of these things that I have just pointed out it's not a complete list. Matter of fact, I would argue it's probably pretty short what I've provided. Again, I would invite everybody to go back and evaluate the Declaration of Independence and look at those 27 separate grievances that the founding fathers had put forth. And I'm sure that there's some in there that I have not even touched on yet. But the list is very long of abuses and injuries against the American people. The people have the right and duty and responsibility to question power and their government when they act invariably against the interests, the rights, and the liberties of the people themselves. To question and press for accountability, to hold these people accountable, and I would argue to ensure that many of these people live with a perpetual shame for the rest of their life, because we know that many of these people, given the structure of the Senate and the general government that we have, they're going to insulate themselves. They have their nice little aristocracy that's set in cement. They're not going to go anywhere. They're going to protect each other. They'll use things like pardons to get each other away from criminal charges preemptively. They'll be the ones to overlook the investigations. They'll be the ones to find that there's nothing wrong, that they've done nothing wrong. This is not to question all of this and to hold these people accountable is not un-American. Quite frankly, it is an American value. It is American principle. It is American to test and judge and question and tell the government and set the record straight that you are wrong. And we have the ability to recall these people. We have the ability to remove these people. We have the ability to change the things that are broken. We, the people, have the ability to do this. I won't get into certain particulars because I'm sure that would lead me down to a road of ruin. But when a government becomes destructive of its means, people have to figure out the best way that they want to move forward. It's not sustainable to continue down this road. And I hope, and I really wish, I know wish is one of those words, that we can find a way to deal with this problem in the best manner that we can exhaust all of these resources. But again, that list is long and it's not a complete list. And the abuses only get worse. The more you comply, the more you invite. I think it has to be fundamentally understood, and people should not be afraid of this, right? Resistance and rebellion to tyrants are part of, if not the fundamental cornerstone of who we are. It is American. And it's not just me saying that, they put that in the Declaration of Independence. It's a fundamentally understood thing. It's universally understood thing. And it's not just something that I understand or that a handful of the founders understood. You see the Anti-Federalists, and you can go all the way back to many other philosophers of the time and historians of the time that understood what precipitated tyranny and what precipitated oppression. They understood the actions that took place. They understood all of the conditions that arose. Empires will eventually fall. I've remarked that before. And historically, we typically only see them fall one of two ways. Typically, they can die without a peep, and they can fall apart, and that's it. It's like nothing ever happened. But then you also have the other type of fall, which is oftentimes bloody. It is terrible. It is violent. And it is one that I think many people are not prepared for, to be completely honest. I don't think it's a situation that many people fundamentally understand. And if I may make a reference, you know, I had listened to one of the podcasts that I like to frequent every once in a while. And this was pertaining to the current Iran war. And I don't remember who it was that was on Daniel Davis's podcast, but I think it was pretty, it kind of stuck with me a little bit, which is essentially to the point that the American people, they, in a very, very long time, I don't remember, I wish I could remember the name of the guest who said this, but they had essentially said that the American people, unlike so many other countries before, have never known in a very, very long time, if maybe perhaps since the Civil War, maybe a little bit before that. It's hard to say. You know, I don't want to say it with absolute certainty, but they did make a point that the American people had never really known a real hardship of having to live with so little, like all of the countries that we have bombed, like all of the different countries that have had to make do, like all of these different things. They had mentioned, the guest that was on Daniel Davis's podcast and mentioned that the American people wouldn't even know what to do if they ever had to experience hardship like that. And I thought to myself initially, my gut reaction was, well, we have a resilience in this country. We have a history and a legacy of resistance and rebellion from our inception as a country, right? But then I thought back, aside from the Civil War, when was the last time, the real last time, to where we haven't had any real like general infrastructure? When's the last time that we've, you could maybe cite that the Great Depression perhaps, was a hard time. Certainly there was a lot of hardship there. But it's one of those things to where I think when this guest said this, I think he kind of meant, generally across the board. You're always going to have people that have experienced hardship to some degree, but I think what he's talking about is real hardship to where there's nothing. And I think the reason he said that is because if we ever had to experience a war the way that we have waged against so many other countries, we really wouldn't know what to do. And I do wonder if we have gotten to a point to where we have become so comfortable and so used to having comforts in our lives that the tenacity for preserving not only the future for our posterity, but our own rights and liberty is not there. And I thought about this for a while, and and I still have a hopeful mind. I think that Americans have the ability to adapt. I think that's something that we are good at. I think when we are faced with hard times, we do adapt. I think when we have hardship, whether it's a natural or a man-made catastrophe, I think that we do have the ability to pull together and to overcome a lot of these different things. I think that's very true. But I also do think that many people are too used to comfort. And so I to some degree, I'm kind of in between on this, right? To some degree. And when I look at this list that I've compiled, I don't know how well you can see it. It's kind of all these different things right here. When I look at just a number of these things, and all the usurpation, all the consolidation, all of the abuses from our government that we have to face on a daily basis, right? That, hands down, we have the largest government in the world, and they know that, and they take advantage of it. And these abuses continue and perpetuate time and time and time and again. They continue moving on, and they continue to expand. And it does seem like there is a level of comfort in which people are going to tolerate this type of situation. Where my hopefulness comes in is there is a growing number of people that I feel are sick of it. They don't want to deal with this anymore. They are at a point to where they want something different and they want to change the outcome. And we have to be relentless in our opposition to these things. We have to dig deep, we have to dig down, and we must not let these people overcome us. We have to be involved. Because this situation it's not going to get any better. Especially when you sit back and you just allow these things to continue going on and you say, well, what can I do? What can I do? Find other like-minded people. Together as a group, you're far more powerful. But we have to recognize these things, and we have to learn before we do something, and before we become active, and before we do this. We have to educate ourselves, and we have to understand what these things are and why they violate our rights and liberty, why they violate the very foundation and the fabric of our country. If we can't recognize what it is that we are supposed to fight against, how do you fight against it? You're just wasting time and energy at that point. So ultimately, when I look at all of the things that are going on, it's easy to get wrapped up into modern day things, all of the very contemporary issues and all of the happenings and the goings on of everything that we see around us. And it's also very, very easy to become blackpilled because look, it's dire. I mean, like I said, this list, that you can see right here is just a handful of things. And of course, I didn't break it down entirely, but you can see all of the consolidation, all of the power, all of the abuses. So I try to take these things and I try to reflect back and say, okay, what were the arguments here? What were the warning signs? What are the points of recognition that I can see so I can be more capable when I go into that arena, when I get together with other people that, love liberty? How do we fight this? How do we come out against it? How do we best go against these things and oppose these things and defend against these things to where we can actually see some traction? You can't do that if you don't know what you're looking at and if you don't know what the warnings are. And, a great point, is this one. Laws that are contrary to the Constitution are deemed unconstitutional, right? Therefore, null and void. Now, one of the major concerns, and thank you very much for that comment. One of the things that the Anti-Federalists were very concerned about is the fact that when the Constitution was set forth, their concern was it left too much open to where the ability of being able to add something, whether it was a treaty or something that would be folded in to law, which would become the supreme law of the land, would go against the rights and liberties of the people. You saw this in one of my recent episodes to where I talked about the Senate, the ability to, in particular, they talked about pardons and treaties and all of that. The fact that if a treaty is made, that becomes part of the supreme law of the land, right? And this is not the only example, but it is one of the more prominent ones that the Anti-Federalists made, to where it is bound within there. That they were extremely worried that things like that would occur and therefore would create a problem. Thus is why I feel that when you go back and you look at this, we must look at what the Anti-Federalists had to say. We must look and understand their concerns about the Constitution before and after the ratification of it, and why they raised concern about when they went to convention that it became not about the amending of the Articles of Confederation, but the ratifying of the Constitution. History has a way of teaching us in a very brutal fashion to where if we don't pay attention to it, it's not so much a matter of being doomed to repeat it, but a very painful disciplinary action of not being attentive enough to do anything about these problems. And you can't do anything about these problems if you can't identify these problems. We are a nation in distress. There is no doubt about it. We have a government that usurps and abuses liberty and rights on a daily basis. It consolidates power. It effectively neuters the 10th Amendment because you have states that are unwilling to exercise their 10th Amendment. You have a Senate and a House that are absolutely in concert with each other. You have an executive that's out of control, a judiciary that really does nothing at all anymore. It is destructive of its means. Does it mean it's hopeless? No. I don't think that it's hopeless. But one of the things that I will say in ending, before I go through some of the comments here, is we do have to face the reality to where if we can't make a change within the current situation that we're in, there may come a reality in which we may have to alter or abolish what this situation looks like. It's not an ideal thing, but I do have to land a little bit more on the anti-federalist side of this and come down to the realization that I think if we're going to ever see any form of real progress in terms of liberty, that the states are going to have to assert their rights, their 10th Amendment rights, their sovereignty, and that the states are going to have to take steps. And when I say the states, the people within those states are going to have to assert themselves in a way like we've never seen before. And I think that's a very, very hard thing for many, many people to come to terms with. And doesn't necessarily mean that it has to turn into this bloody match, this giant catastrophe, but we have to start doing something. Regardless of what the administration is, whether it's this one, the previous one, 16 after it, I think we're in a situation where we are not going to see anything change in the national government. And I call it a national government because we are not a federal union. We lost that a long, long time ago. So I think the onus is on the people of the many states to determine where you want to go. How do you want this to play out? And you know, it's one of the it's a hard thing for me to even have come to terms with, because I had hoped for a very long time that, you know, maybe we could just pull this out. You know, maybe we could get enough change. Maybe we could affect something to where invariably, and you know, I'll just say it, perhaps a miracle may happen, but I'm not writing on that. That's not a method. Again, in the very beginning of this, accountability, eternal vigilance, and knowing when not to comply were not just foundational parts of our republic, but they were expectations. And the ability to defend ourselves against tyranny and despotism. We're a nation in distress, man. And I don't want to sit here and say that I have all the answers, but what I can say is when you go back and you look at history and you look at all of the things that many of these individuals that came well before us had warned against, had said, hey, if you're not paying attention, this is going to happen to a T. If we don't learn from that, how are we ever going to move forward? How are we ever going to be able to separate ourselves and defend ourselves and to throw off the shackles of tyranny? Again, the list is long, man. So we got to find a way forward. So with that being said, I'm going to go through some of these comments here. and just see what you guys and gals had to say. I see Gene the Machine was here. Welcome, Gene the Machine. Mayor David. I thought I saw some Quack, Ground Fog, and then let's see here. Canine Cartel, great to have you. Let's go through a few. Gene the Machine, been here from the start, forgot to sign in. That's all good, man. It's all good. I really, really appreciate you stopping by. This was an interesting one here. There used to be a movement for a convention of the states. Whatever happened to that? Mayor, I did, I vaguely remember hearing some rumblings about it. Allegedly somebody that I had spoken to, this was quite some time ago, and I don't know if it was true, but allegedly the Convention of the States has gotten fairly close to enough, but I'm not sure how truthful that is. I think it's still a thing. I just don't know how prominent it is. But it may be one of those things, man, to where like, what do you do? What is the answer here? And the hard thing is we have to be realistic about this. We have to be honest with ourselves in terms of moving forward and how we best, fight against this type of thing. This ever growing, this ever consuming, consolidating government, man. This national government that. It took me a while, but I talked to a few people about the Convention of the States, and I understand the merits to it. I do. And now it seems like, maybe we'll not see it in our lifetime, but I think that we're coming to, the historical point to where you see that downturn with an empire, and it simply just can't sustain itself. It just can't. It doesn't. I don't foresee people getting much better in the future. I really don't, in terms of people that are put into positions. I find it hard to say even elected positions, but I think this whole thing's going to break apart eventually. And I think one of the best things that we can do is really to prepare not only ourselves and our families, whether it happens in our lifetime, but at least set the foundation to where if that does happen, if things do not sustain themselves, right, which historically empires don't, that there's at least something people can build off of. Whether the Convention of the States is the right thing, that I'm not sure. But I do think that we still have to keep fighting. We still have to try and create something better to the best of our abilities. Let's see. I will be so bold as to say that we have the most corrupt, dishonest, evil, and child trafficking government that we have ever had and that this world has ever seen. Well, David, I think you're probably not far off. We certainly have a real den of degeneracy here. And it's hard to be optimistic here, but I think a lot of that optimism can come with working together and really coming together on things that we can really start to affect change. And I've been a huge advocate of making that difference in your local communities. If it's possible to do so in your local communities, get out, talk to people, form, meaningful groups and start to ferment that change at that local level and create a bulwark because, man, I just don't see that change happening at that higher echelon level. I really don't. Let's see. I read, I did see that. So I want to highlight this, Mayor had pointed out, they understand, what it's like to live with little. I growing up to some degree with my family have, maybe not as bad as others. But we've gone through our ups and downs. We've had our bumps and bruises, and I think there's a resilience when you've had to deal with any type of like some form of adversity or whatever hardship. I think that has a tendency to bolster you and to build you up as a human being and generate some character. And so like, just to your point, you talked about having like chickens and stuff, and the fact that like you're willing to help your neighbors and help with skills and essentially creating a barter system. You got to help each other, man. Like, I think that's one of the biggest issues that we have today is we have a society that just is not, and maybe it's just where I live, but it's just, we have a society that is just not willing to go out of their way to help each other. And I think that if we're going to move, if we're even going to start to move that needle, that is one thing that we have to really, really start to fix. And then David goes on to say, we all need to be growing our own food and raising our own livestock. Yeah, I mean, it's and he goes out to 117,000 farmers. I don't know the numbers on that, but Rebecca, who I've had on here before, we've talked about the agricultural issues, and especially when it comes to like the raw milk and the hyper regulation of a lot of this stuff. I mean, man, it is not good. So we definitely have to have a more self-reliant disposition. And I think the more self-reliant that we can become as individuals, but also in our community, I mean, that in and of itself is a way to start at least the process of destroying those shackles of tyranny and the binds that we're held in. Because if they can't control your ability to survive entirely, then it's very, very difficult for them to control you. That's why anytime I've ever brought up like gun control in particular, I call it people control. If you disarm the people, you control the people. And so, if you can take away one more mechanism for this government to control you, whether it's the highest echelon or it's your state and local, man, I mean, it's a heck of a first start. So Mayor also goes on to say we have to be better at recognizing these tyrannical antics. Sadly, many aren't. And people want to poo-poo education. They want to poo-poo independent studies, and they want to it's like, there's somebody else that can do that. Well, I mean, our founders even fundamentally understood that a moral and essentially well-educated, well-read populace is going to be able to recognize, the incursions of tyranny, as it were. And when you don't know what to look for, it becomes very, very difficult to say like, hey, this is violating my rights. And when you don't know if it's violating your rights, and you also don't fundamentally understand how to thwart these things and how to fight against these things, it becomes very, very tumultuous and just a bad overall situation for everybody concerned. Let's see here. Another one by David. I believe it won't be long before we are told what and where we can grow our own food. I believe the government in the very near future will try to stop us all from growing our own food. There's, when you look at the ridiculousness of like the rainwater catchment systems, you have some states that tried to ban like wood stoves and all these things. When you can strip that form of self-reliance from people, again, it just factors right into that population control type of dynamic, and it creates a dependency. So, I mean, I'm not sure what that would look like, but I think that we have, to many degrees, started to see that, not just recently, but for quite some time with the regulation, especially when you look at things like raw milk, when you look at meat and a whole bunch of different things. They're trying to regulate it to make it as hard as possible to be self-sufficient, which means they have a greater exertion of control. Let's take another look here at Mayor. What I encourage people to do is just work at a local level in their town councils and start off. Then work on your county, which Trish and I have done. And, man, I mean, I've said that for a long time. You got to start local. You got to start making the moves there. And I know to some people, it's like, but the the federal government and the presidency and all of this. And, but look, I mean, if you can create a good, strong bulwark and you can start from that ground up, you're going to have more, you're going to have such a greater ability of being able to thwart those things and to off-put those things in the future if you have a good foundation. And this is one of those ways that you can start, fighting back, is getting into that local situation, getting into the realm of local politics and being able to say, hey, no, we're not going to go with this. We're not going to agree with this. And it gives you a stronger position to start challenging those higher echelons of power as well. So I think it's a great point, Mayor. And there's another one here by Canine Cartel. The Declaration of Independence says government only has power because we allow it. It says your rights don't come from government. You're born with them. Government exists to protect our rights. Yeah, 100%. And it's something that, especially when you start delving into the natural rights, in the first law of nature, as Sam Adams and so many others had pointed out, man, I mean, it becomes a rabbit hole. But when you realize, where these guys came from, especially in the care and concern, and again, I have to attribute the Bill of Rights and a lot of the stronger language that we see even in our Constitution to the Anti-Federalists, that they were adamant about this, not just in the Declaration of Independence, but in the Constitution, when they realized, like, okay, clearly they don't want to. It's not about amending the Articles of Confederation, where it's becoming a constitution. They're adamant about a Bill of Rights. They're adamant about making sure that it was understood that the rights do not come from government. They're not gifts from government. They're natural, inherent, God-given rights. And I think that just adds, what you said just adds even so much more to that, because, yeah, that was the position that they had, man. So let's see here. I want to highlight this. We've removed half of our corrupt police force, including the chief. We've removed our corrupt mayor, town manager, and we've removed corrupt county attorney. It's not perfect, but progress is made. Dude, big props to you, man. I just, I have to give you a round of applause there, because that is what it's about. And it can be done. It absolutely can be done. Does it mean it's going to be easy? No, of course it's not going to be easy. But I mean, you have people that are doing this, and it's not just where Mayor's at. We see this in many, many places. And there were, one of the things that did provide me some hope is, during the lockdowns, you had people that were defiant. And we even see, to some degree, that defiance that still continues to go forth with some sheriffs. We see that happening with, some smaller municipalities saying no to the state, no to the federal government. There are people that genuinely do still have that spirit. And I think, sometimes we have to take that leap and we have to step foot into that situation to really make that come to fruition. And we don't have the luxury of really being able to wait for somebody else to do it. We have to be involved to some degree, whether that's helping educate people or whether that's being involved in our local area and to a greater degree. There's so many ways of being able to affect change in your immediate area. And, and I think that this example here is just fantastic. So great job. Seriously, great job. Some clock. A unified local government is the best protection against a corrupt federal government. Absolutely, 100%. I couldn't agree with you more. And it's something that, I would actually say that, that's sounding pretty anti-federalist there. And I have to say that is one of the things that really appeals to me, is I think they fundamentally understood that government that is close to the people is the easiest to contain, the easiest to keep in line, and easy to watch over and to ensure that our rights and liberties are preserved. And so when you can keep that close to you and you can unify it and you can have that bulwark, man, it really does make a difference. It really, really does make a difference. So that was a great comment. Let's see here. Last one here. If we don't learn and take action, we will die as a country. And, just ending on that, again, going back to what I said previously, several minutes ago, I don't know that I don't know that the United States is going to stay a country. And that's something that, really evaluating the situation and analyzing it and going back and looking at the arguments and looking at a lot of the different historical documents and comparing it to today, and really taking into account all of the things. And I mean, we have I hate to say it over and over again, we have the largest, most monstrous government in the world. And I just don't see how it sustains itself. And I think the rot is so deep that it would take a literal miracle for something to decore it and leave anything intact that has not already been destroyed to salvage that larger general government. Where I think the hope is where several people have indicated already, which I think is the local and potentially the state level. I think they're far more deserving of our time. Not saying that we shouldn't pay attention, we shouldn't fight back against a lot of the abhorrent things that are going on. That's not what I'm saying, but I think devoting a lot of time also to fixing our immediate situation, our immediate area, our local municipalities and governance, our counties, potentially even our states, if that's even possible. I think that's going to be the primary thing. And because I think realistically setting the groundwork for potentially surviving the aftermath is going to be more invaluable to people than trying to fix something that I think is so broken in totality, that we fight to buy ourselves time and we fight to do the best that we can at the higher level. But I think the real fight's local. So, I hope I'm wrong, to some degree. I hope that I'm wrong and we can fix something. And I will always advocate, like, hey, if we have the ability to make an inroad here or affect change in a meaningful way, absolutely we should do it. So I don't want people to think that that's not the case, but we definitely need more attention needs to be paid to the local. And I think that is the way forward. I think when you look at all of the things that I listed off here, our ability to say no and to not comply to all of these things is much greater when we can solve the local equation and take that to our counties and to our states. So I hope you guys and gals kind of enjoyed and got something out of this episode tonight. Thank you so much for coming by, supporting me, and really lending me your time. I always appreciate the support that you guys and gals provide. And the comments were awesome tonight. You really gave me a lot to be able to tee off on and to answer. So I greatly appreciate that as well. Again, if you like what you see, if you think that it's worthy of sending to somebody else, give me a like, potentially subscribe if you haven't been here before. Welcome here, and share it with somebody that you think might get something from this, that might find it interesting, that you want to just pass the message on to. We always got to keep moving forward. We always got to keep trying to work for liberty and work for a better future for our posterity. We are the torchbearers in this moment right now, and we have to keep that flame lit. So without further ado, thanks again, and I will send you guys and gals out on a little bit of exit music. So enjoy the outro.